What do you believe about being seen? And personally, I believe it's not necessarily the fear of speaking, but maybe it's the fear of being seen. Who taught you what you believe about being seen? Children do not choose their files, they inherit them. And then they grow up and spend most of their adult lives living inside inherited conclusions. Does this deserve to travel forward? The belief that standing out is dangerous, the conclusion that was written in a moment of pain. The change stops when someone is brave enough to examine it and brave enough to choose. I want to take you back to a banking hall. I was 5 or 6 years old, I think. My father was a banker. And one day I went to visit him at work, and I remember the floor. It was so clean, it was almost reflective. I remember standing there as a small girl and looking down, seeing my own image looking back at me from that floor. As a small girl, in her good clothes, her Sunday best, because you dressed up, when you went to visit your father at work. And I stood there, a little fixated on that reflection, on the idea that the floor was so clean, you could see yourself in it. And then my father came, and he took me around that office, and he introduced me to every person he met. And he said, "Meet my beautiful daughter Rose." He said it to the tellers. He said it to the people behind the desks. He said it to whoever crossed our path. And in that banking hall, "Meet my beautiful daughter Rose." And I remember why he was making such a fuss. Nobody had ever introduced me like that before. Not that I could remember. I was a child. And children usually are seen and not heard. You are brought along, you sit quietly, you greet when you're told to greet. You don't usually get announced. But my father announced me to everyone and with pride, with a kind of certainty that does not question itself. And something in me received it quietly, without ceremony, without knowing that it was being filed. But it was. Because every time I went back to that office after that, people remembered me and they called me by name. Not because I had done anything or had achieved anything, but because my father had introduced me and the room had received his introduction. I felt seen, I felt special, and I felt worth knowing just because I was his. So that was the first file, written on a squeaky clean banking hall floor by the proudest voice I had ever heard say my name. And then something came later, and it did a number on my father's voice. Not immediately, not all at once, but slowly. The way one piece of writing can fade when something brighter is written on top of it. And today we are going to find both pieces of writing, the one underneath and the one on top, and we are going to decide which one gets to stay. Welcome back to Season 2 of Rewire with Rose. Last week, I promised you something specific. I told you we were moving out of reflect and into the E of rewire. And the E stands for evaluate. And I told you we were going to ask 3 questions. Where did this come from? Is it still true? Does it still deserve to travel with me? So today we answer these 3 questions. But before we go anywhere, I want to say something that most conversations about beliefs and patterns don't say clearly enough. And I want to say it first because if I don't say it, Some of you will close this episode before you get to the part that matters the most. Evaluate is not demolition. It's discernment. Your job today is not to tear down everything your parents and your culture and the people that loved you and your faith community put into you. Your job is to see clearly what is there and decide deliberately as the adult that you are now what to keep and what to finally set down. And those are not the same job. And the difference between them is the whole work of this episode. I'm Rose, and let me tell you what evaluate exactly means. So we've spent 5 episodes now in the reflect phase of Rewire. We found the inner voice, we found the pattern, we found the subconscious mechanism underneath it, we found the child who built the cage, and we found why knowing all that was never enough to change it. So that was reflect, pausing and looking honestly at what is there. Evaluate is the next movement, and it is where you pick up what reflect brought up, and you look at it, you hold it up in the light, you examine it, you turn it around, and you ask, is this mine? Did I choose this, or did it choose me? And then, this is the part that most people skip. You ask whether it was ever true. Not just whether it serves you now, whether it was ever accurate in the first place. Because some beliefs were never accurate. They were just loud. Loud enough to sound like a fact. Loud enough to go unquestioned for decades. And some beliefs were accurate, in the specific moment they were installed, but have never been updated ever since. They were true for a child in a particular season. And that child is now a grown woman or a grown man in a completely different room. And the belief is still running. The instruction it was given 30 years ago. And some beliefs, and this is the one I want you to hold carefully, some beliefs were installed the same way as every limiting pattern we have talked about, by a parent, in a vivid moment, through a story or a gesture or a repeated behavior, under the weight of a trusted person's love. And they are not cages, they are foundations, things that built you, things that are the reason you're still standing today. And your job in Evaluate is to know which is which. Not to assume that everything you inherited was a wound, because not everything is a wound. And not to protect everything inherited from scrutiny, but to look at it honestly with the same eyes at both. So here is the science beneath it. Remember a couple of episodes ago, we talked about Dr. Bruce Lipton, the Stanford scientist we've been drawing on this season, who found that 95% of your daily life is run by your subconscious mind. We made a distinguishment or a difference between the conscious and the subconscious mind. So the subconscious mind is that vast storage system that absorbed everything before you turned 7 years old. And then Konrad Lorenz, whose Nobel Prize research on imprinting we spoke about in episode 5, found that the nervous system writes deeply under intense emotion, which means your subconscious mind is not a single file. It's a library of many files, full of everything that was written into you by the people who raised you. The fears, the stories, the proverbs, the gestures, the corrections, the introductions, like was given to me on a clean banking floor. And not everything in that library is a cage. Some of it is the reason you're still standing today. Some of it is the reason you kept going when every pattern said stop. Some of it is the reason you started this podcast, for example, me, and sat in front of this camera and told my story about tambourine. Remember the story I gave you about how I was picked out of a lineup for a musical for tambourines, and I was told I didn't qualify enough. So something carried you here. And that something was not only the wound. The wound is what we have been tracing, and we have spent a lot more time there. But there were also deposits. There were positive things made by people who loved you before you had the words to receive them consciously. So the work of evaluate is not to burn the library. It's not to say that everything is a wound, everything we inherited is bad. It is to walk through it slowly and read what it actually is on the shelves. It's to take a stock of that library and ask ourselves, how many of these files are still true? How many belong to us? How many are serving us? I want to show you what this means. One day, many years ago, I had a conversation with my father. And he showed me his two open hands. And he was showing me because I had complained to him, because I was frustrated, because we had the basics growing up. We had food, we had clothing, we had shelter, but not the extras. And I used to watch other children with their bicycles and their toys, and there are many changes of clothes. And I knew my father had a good income. He was a banker. We should have had more, but we did not. And I wanted to know why. And then one day I found out that he was giving money away and provisions away consistently and generously to other people without any anxiety. I remember knowing at the time that because bankers are paid early, I don't know whether that's still the case, but they used to be among the people that were paid earliest, like on the 23rd, 24th of the month. I remember hearing, going to visit my dad and would find a few people around his office around that time of the month. So he gave plenty without keeping a score. And I was upset about it. So I went to him and I said, why do you keep spending money on other people? Why do you keep giving it away? We could have more, We could be living better. And he listened to me and he let me finish. And he did not dismiss me. Then he held out both hands, open, with his palms facing up. And he said, when the hands are open like this, there is space for God to put something in it. When they are clenched, holding tightly onto what they already have, there's nowhere to put the blessing. I was a child. I did not fully understand it then, but something in me received it and filed it away into the library. The same way the nervous system files everything that arrives under the weight of a trusted person's conviction. And my mother had her own version of that same theology. She came from a well-to-do family where her mother fed everyone who visited their home. Not just family, not just neighbors, but everyone who arrived. This included madmen that would arrive in their gate, people that were disabled, the displaced, people the community had turned their backs on. No one was turned away from their home. And my mother carried that into our home. So strange people would always come to our door. People the neighborhood had forgotten, and we were made to serve them food. As a child, I was embarrassed by it because other children would make jokes. They would say that, your house is always full of mad people or strange people. And I did not know how to respond to that. But my mother would say, we can never run out of food because God knows we need to feed all these people. And therefore, there will always be food. And she was right. We never ran out. Not once. 2 parents, 2 open hands, the same theology, the same God, the same abundance model installed in the same child who was also learning from a completely different source, that staying small was safe. That the deer goes home to its mother, as we spoke about in a previous episode. That you check yourself before you assume you have mastered the moves, as the music teacher required me to do. Both files in the same library, in the same child, and the evaluate work requires me to see both, the cage and the foundation, with the same honest eyes, without demolishing one or protecting the other from scrutiny. Because both are real, and both are running right now in this conversation. I want to do something now that I think will be more useful than just a framework I could give you. I want to do a belief audit. And I want us to do this on camera. 3 questions. And I will give my honest answers. I want you to do it alongside me. So if you're somewhere you can write, get something, a phone or a notebook or a back of a receipt. It doesn't matter what it is. Because your answers to these questions are the beginning of the actual work. That's what evaluating Rewire is about. Not the preparation for the work itself. So the first question we are going to answer is, what do I believe about being seen? I'm going to answer this honestly, not the polished version, the real one. I believe that being seen is being acknowledged. It's being called by name. It is having someone walk into a room with you and say, this person matters. Know her name. Know her face. She's worth remembering. I believe that being seen is good. I believe I'm worth seeing. That file was written in that banking all moment that I was just speaking about by a father who introduced me to everybody and called me his beautiful daughter. That file is real and it has served me. But there's another file, and this is the honest part. I also believe somewhere underneath everything that being seen under the wrong circumstances is dangerous. The kind of eyes that turn towards you are not always the kind that acknowledge. Sometimes they are the kind that pity. Sometimes they are the kind that correct you, like my musical teacher. Sometimes they turn towards you in a church hall, and what they carry in them is not pride. And I've spent a long time, more time than I realized until I sat with this, managing which kind of eyes I'm visible to, staying visible enough to function, invisible enough to be safe, and raising my hand but not too high, speaking up but not too loudly, taking the room but leaving some of it for someone else. Because taking it fully felt like the kind of thing that gets you called out in front of everyone, like I was called out before my teammates that many years ago. So that's my honest answer. It's not one belief, it's 2 competing ones. And both are real, both are running, both in the room with me every time someone turns to look. Now pause here. What do you believe about being seen? Not what you think you should believe, but what do you actually believe? And in your body, in the moments when the eyes turn toward you, write it down. It is said that the fear of public speaking is one of the biggest fears in this world. And personally, I believe it's not necessarily the fear of speaking, but maybe it's the fear of being seen. So, what do you actually believe about being seen? I hope you've written it down. The second question is, who first taught me this, directly or by example? So my father taught me the first belief in the banking hall on a clean banking floor. He introduced me to everyone he met and called me his beautiful daughter and made people remember my name. He taught me that I was worth seeing without condition, without having to earn it, just because I was his. But the experience I had with my music teacher, as I described before, it taught me the second belief. Not because it was trying to, and not because the music teacher woke up that morning intending to write anything permanent in a 9-year-old's nervous system, but because the nervous system does not distinguish between a teacher's assessment or a verdict on who you are. It just receives the instruction. Remember how the behavioral scientist taught us in the last episode. And the instruction that arrived that day, under that level of intensity and emotion, with that many eyes turning towards me, it said this: when people turn to look at you, they are not always looking with pride. Sometimes the looking is the correction. Sometimes being called by name across a room is not an introduction, it's removal. And the nervous system filed that away as protection. It filed it as, remember this so it does not happen again. And it kept that file alongside my father's file, both of them running simultaneously for decades. Now answer that question for yourself. Who taught you what you believe about being seen? Name them. Not to blame them, but to see them clearly. Because until you can see whose voice is running, until you can say, this is my 9-year-old speaking, not me, you cannot separate what is yours from what you inherited. The third question we are going to look at is, did I choose these beliefs, or did they choose me? Or did they get chosen for me? Neither of them. I did not choose to be introduced by my dad. I did not choose to have my name called across a church hall in front of everyone, in front of my team. I did not choose what either of those moments wrote, because I was a child, and children do not choose their files. They inherit them. And then they grow up and spend most of their adult lives living inside inherited conclusions, because they've never stopped to examine until now, until this moment. Which means, and I want you to hear this, the pattern you have been carrying is not a character flaw. It is not evidence of your weakness. It's not something you should have figured out or fixed a long time ago. It is a program. It's a software installed before you had any say, by people who are doing their best with what they had. And now for the first time, you have the tools to look at it. Hold it up to the light. Ask what it is made of, and decide what to do with it. And this is the evaluate work that we're going to be doing. I want to speak directly to someone right now. Maybe you've been listening to this episode and a part of you is relieved because you thought evaluate meant taking everything your parents gave you and questioning all of it. No. Or deciding your faith community was wrong, that your culture was a problem, that the people who raised you installed nothing but limitations in you. And that felt disloyal, and it felt like the kind of thing a grateful child does not do. The kind of thing that dishonors people who sacrificed for you. The kind of thing that dishonors people who sacrificed for you. People who did their best. People who are no longer here to defend themselves. And so you pushed the question away. You told yourself, my situation is different. My parents did the best they could, so I should be grateful. And you closed the door. on the very examination that would have set you free. So I want to say something clearly to that part of you. This evaluate work does not require disloyalty. It requires honesty. And those are not the same thing. You can honor someone fully and still look clearly at what they passed on to you. You can be deeply grateful and still choose to update what you inherited. You can love your mother and still say, the belief she installed in me about what kind of woman asks for more, that one I'm setting down. That is not betrayal. And that's the work of an adult who understands that our parents were also carrying programs they never examined. Because truth be told, who had taught our parents how to even be parents? Who understands that what was passed on to her was passed on to them first? By someone who also never stopped to ask, is this still true? Does this still apply? Does this deserve to travel forward? The chain stops when someone is brave enough to examine it and brave enough to choose. Your parents were doing the best they could with what they had at the level of consciousness they were at. And some of what they gave you was genuinely irreplaceable, foundationally good. For example, the open hand example that my dad gave me, the proud introduction, the kitchen that never ran empty, the proverbs that were given with love, dressed in the language of correction. Keep those. Hold them carefully because they are yours and they built you. And some of what they gave you was their own unexamined fear, passed on without knowing it, that lives in a gated community and you find yourself scared, the belief that standing out is dangerous, the conclusion that was written in a moment of pain and never updated. Your job is not to blame them for those. Your job is to see them clearly enough to choose, this one I keep and this one I set down. And that's all. That is the whole work. And that's evaluate in Rewire. So let me show you what that work looks like in a specific moment from my own career. So I was already doing a management role. I think I have given this example before. I was performing it, delivering results, showing up at the level the role required, and when the position was formally advertised, I did not apply. When I sit with that moment today, when I evaluate it honestly, I can see both files running at exactly the same time. My father's file said, you're worth introducing, you're worth knowing, you are the person they're looking for. Walk in and say so. But the file that my musical teacher gave me, it said wait. Wait for the external confirmation. Wait for someone else to tell you that you've mastered the moves. Don't assume. Don't reach. Wait. And in that moment, my tambourine moment was louder. I heard the musical teacher louder in that moment. Not because it was more true, but because intense emotion writes deeper than warm love. Because the tambourine moment was more recent. Because remember that time I was 9 years old. The experience with my dad, I was about 5 or 6 or thereabout. Because I had not learned to stand in front of the library and read what was actually on the shelves. My father would have introduced me. He would have walked into that office and said, meet my daughter Rose. She has been running this already. She is exactly who you're looking for. But his voice had been written over. And so instead of introducing myself, I waited for the advertisement to tell me whether I was worth considering. And that is what the overwrite cost me. Not the role specifically, because it did come to me eventually, but the willingness to name myself for it as the right person for that role. And that is what evaluate lets me see clearly. Not to punish myself for what I did not do, but to understand what was running and to make sure that the next time I'm standing outside a room I have hand that I'm qualified for, I walk in and introduce myself. Now I want to ask you the question I've been building towards. The 9-year-old girl on her road home, after my experience with the tambourine moment with my musical teacher calling me out, wrote a conclusion about herself. I am not good enough. And I promised you last week that Evaluate would help you ask, is that still true? So here is my honest answer. I am good enough. I may not have had the particular skill, the tambourine moves, that specific set of moves, at that specific level, at that specific moment in time. I may genuinely not have had them. And that was accurate. The assessment was situationally correct. But the conclusion my nervous system drew, that not having that skill meant I was not good enough as a person, that was an overgeneralization made by a 9-year-old. With the tools available to a 9-year-old, she could not say I did not have that particular skill yet, and I'm gifted in many other areas. She could only say I was not picked. Therefore, I'm not good enough. That is all our tools allowed for her. But I'm now not 9 years old anymore, and my tools are different now. And when I evaluate the conclusion against the actual evidence, I said previously, I did get a first-class honors. The management roles that I was already performing, the rooms that I've received, what I carry. The actual evidence does not support the original verdict. The belief was not entirely wrong. It was just too broad. And I can now narrow it. I was not ready for that specific thing at that moment. And I'm gifted in many other skills. And both of those things are true. And what I narrow it to is something I can actually work with. And that is what Evaluate is about. Not a triumphant declaration and not performance of recovered confidence. It's just a quiet, honest, specific correction. One that the adult can hold without flinching. I want to say something about faith here, because the open hands lesson my dad taught me is not just a principle about money and generosity. It is the operating principle of Evaluate itself. When your hands are clenched around a belief, even a limiting one, there's no room for anything new to be placed there. The woman who cannot let go of the conclusion that she's not good enough has no room to receive evidence that she is. And the woman who cannot set down the program that says staying small is safe has no room to step into the room that is waiting for her. The woman who is protecting every belief her parents gave her from honest examination has no room to discover which ones were always meant to stay and which ones were always meant to be set down. So Evaluate asks you to open your hands, not to lose what is good, not to abandon what is foundational, but to release your grip long enough to see what you are actually holding, and then choose deliberately. So faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And sometimes the evidence is already there in a banking hall, in a first-class honors, in a management role being performed before anyone thought to formalize it, in a table that never ran empty, no matter how many people arrive at that door. The evidence was always there. You just needed a belief system, open enough and honest enough to receive it. So here is your one action this week. This week, when the old belief surfaces, when the program fires and says, shrink, when that difficult moment of not good enough surfaces, I want you to immediately name it. One experience that contradicts it. Not a list, just one. One room where you were seen and not found wanting. One moment where you spoke and the room received you. One time where you felt, let me take that again. It's okay, just leave it there. One time when what felt dangerous turned out to be completely survivable. One time where the eyes that turned towards you were not pity, they were recognition. So name it. Out aloud if you can. In writing if you cannot say it. And here is what that practice actually does. Every time you name one piece of counter evidence, every time you say, actually, there was this moment, and in that moment, it was not the tambourine that was right. You are writing a new line in your file, in your library. You're not erasing the old one. You are writing alongside it. And over time, the new writing gets brighter. Not all at once, not dramatically, one contradiction at a time, one room at a time, one brave moment where you stayed when the program said go. So that is evaluate work in practice, and that is how the library gets updated. Evaluate does not just question what limits you, it restores what is buried. And what my father wrote in that banking hall has been buried under enough noise. And it's time to read it again, clearly, out loud, in the room where the old program used to be loudest, as many times as it takes, until it is louder than the tambourine moment, because you're worth introducing. You always were. Before that competition, before the selection, before the verdict, before any of that, someone who knew you walked around you in a room and told everyone your name, and the room received it. And they remembered, and that's the original file. That is what was written first, and that is what Evaluate is asking you to restore. This is Rewire, and I'm Rose. Thank you for being here. If this episode helped you to see the difference between a belief that cages you and one that carries you, share it with one person who is tearing everything down when all they need to do is sort through it carefully and pick what stays. Leave us a comment. Tell us a belief you inherited that you are choosing to keep and one that you're ready to set down. Subscribe to our channel. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And next week, we move deeper into Evaluate, because there's a specific conversation that most of us are not having out aloud about money and what we were taught to believe, about what we deserve, about the beliefs running underneath every salary negotiation you ever undercut yourself, and every daily rate that you have been afraid to name. That conversation will start on Tuesday, so don't miss it. I will see you then. Don't just listen, rewire.